the Russian sleep experiment. It's the terrifying tale in which 5 people are kept awake for 15 days and the horrifying effect it had on their minds and bodies. Now, this is just a story, and there is no evidence to prove this actually happened, but with that in mind, people say with the things that were going on in this time period, there is a possibility something like this could have been conducted. Because we cannot forget that in the same era as this story is based, Russian scientists released a video of severed dog heads that were kept alive for several hours using an artificial blood circulation system. So, although this is fictional, there is a possibility it's based on historical experiments. So let's get into the story. In the 1940s, scientists in Russia decided to conduct experiments to test the effects of extreme sleep deprivation. They selected 5 World War II political prisoners deemed as enemies of the state and promised them freedom if they could stay awake for 30 days. They were then sealed into a small chamber and exposed to an experimental gas stimulant to keep them awake. The prisoners were monitored through portholes and microphones, and they were provided with enough food to last for a month, along with some books, running water, a toilet and beds. For the first 5 days, very little happened, apart from the discussions between the prisoners were getting more emotional and they started to reveal their inner thoughts to each other. On day 6, their behaviour took a turn for the worst. They were getting paranoid, stopped communicating and started blaming each other for being trapped in the room. They started sitting with their backs to each other and strange, inaudible whispers could be heard through the microphones. After 9 days, one of the men started screaming. He ran up and down the small chamber in crazed terror, screaming and crying so much that he lost his voice and reduced it to a whimpering croak. It was later discovered that he had completely torn his vocal cords. The 4 other captives seemed oblivious to the screaming man, but 2 of them were observed quietly tearing pages from books, defecating on them and sticking them to the glass portholes in the chamber. By day 14, the scientists could no longer look in and observe the subjects. On day 15, the screaming had stopped and the room was silent. It was only the oxygen monitors that indicated any sign of life, and no longer able to see in the chamber, the scientists were concerned the men had fallen unconscious. At midnight on the 15th day, they decided to open the chamber to check, but before opening it, they sent this message to the men. "We are opening the chamber to test the microphones. Step away from the door and lie flat on the floor or you will be shot. Compliance will earn one of you freedom." The cell remained silent until one quivering voice said, "We no longer want to be free." The scientists entered the cell and were greeted by a vision of unimaginable horror. The food provided was not eaten, but the men had blood dripping from their mouths. Each of them had chunks of flesh and sinew ripped from their bodies, and there were indications from the destruction of flesh and exposed bones on their fingertips that these horrific wounds had been self-inflicted, not by teeth but by the subject's bare hands. They had been eating themselves. Some of them had so much flesh stripped from their bodies that their rib cage could clearly be seen, and their internal organs that were still attached and working had been removed from the body cavity. The subjects were still unsilent, but when the scientists turned off the gas, it sent them into a frenzy. They attacked the scientists and guards with such strength that one of the security guards who tried to stop the attacks died after having his testicles ripped out with the bare hands of one of the subjects. Along with this, 5 guards were also killed. All efforts to sedate the 5 men were resisted. It was as if their bodies were rejecting any drugs that tried to pacify them. Even after receiving a dose that would normally have put down 3 men, it failed to calm the subjects. In the frenzied violence that followed, 2 of the subjects succumbed to their horrific self-inflicted wounds. Finally, the 3 remaining men were restrained and tied up. All 3 of them were begging to be kept awake, refusing anesthetic, and choosing to have their surgical procedures to have their removed organs placed back in their bodies whilst wide awake and without painkillers. The first subject to be operated on died due to blood loss, and it was discovered that 9 bones in his body had been broken. The second man, who had started screaming on day 6, of course unable to speak, communicated by smiling as surgery was performed in a seemingly sick, satisfying way. When the surgery ended, he became angry and demanded by writing on paper that the surgeon should keep cutting. The third subject simply muttered over and over, "I must remain awake." Although distressed at the monsters they had created, the scientists were still intrigued by their subjects' behaviour and decided to return the 2 surviving men to the chamber, exposing them once again to the gas. Only one made it back to the chamber though, the other fell asleep and passed away. The final surviving subject grew impatient, demanding he be returned to the chamber immediately. He broke free from his restraints and grabbed one of the guarding soldiers' guns, shooting 2 of the scientists in the head. He was overpowered, and before more damage could be done, one of the scientists grabbed the gun and pointed it at the subject. He shouted at him, "What are you? I must know." The subject replied, "Have you forgotten so easily? We are you. We are the madness that lurks within you all, begging to be free at every moment in your deepest animal mind. We are what you hide from in your beds every night. We are what you sedate into silence and paralysis when you go to the nocturnal haven we cannot tread." The scientist staggered backwards before shooting the subject. As he lay dying on the floor, he spluttered his last words, "So nearly free." So, that is the Russian sleep experiment. Like I said, this is just a fictional story, but it's possible that it could have been influenced by historical events. There is no denying that if a country could find a way of keeping soldiers awake for long periods of time, this would greatly increase their fighting abilities. And things like the Stanford prison experiment, the Nazi experiments, and the CIA's MK Ultra mind control prove psychological experiments on humans similar to this have happened. So I hope you've enjoyed this video, and next week's special will be the story behind the Amityville horror. Thanks for watching, and don't forget the importance of a good night's sleep.
The Philadelphia experiment is one of the most grotesque military urban legends ever, and it has endured as an infamous World War II conspiracy theory. But is there any truth to it? Let's take a look. According to legend, on October 28, 1943, the USS Eldridge, a Cannon-class destroyer escort, was conducting top-secret experiments designed to win command of the oceans against the Axis powers. The rumor was that the government was creating technology that would render naval ships invisible to enemy radar, and there in the Philadelphia Naval Shipyard, it was time to test it out. Witnesses then claimed an eerie green-blue glow surrounded the hull of the ship as her generators spun up, and then suddenly, the Eldridge disappeared. The ship was then seen in Norfolk Naval Shipyard in Virginia, before disappearing again and reappearing back in Philadelphia. The legend states that classified military documents reported that the Eldridge crew were affected by the events in disturbing ways. Some went insane, others developed mysterious illnesses, but others still were said to have been fused together with the ship, still alive, but with limbs sealed to the metal. You disturbed? Yeah, should be. And that is actually why the Eldridge's story gained so much momentum. In a 1994 article for the Journal of Scientific Exploration, Jacques F. Vallée theorized that deep-seated imagery is key to planting a hoax into the minds of the masses and of the educated public. But before we break down what really happened that day, let's talk about the man behind the myth, Carl M. Allen, who would go by the pseudonym Carlos Miguel Allende. In 1956, Allende sent a series of letters to Morris K. Jessup, author of the book The Case for the UFO, in which he argued that unidentified flying objects merit further study. Jessup apparently included text about unified field theory, because that is what Allende latched onto for his correspondences. In the 1950s, unified field theory, which has never been proven, attempted to merge Einstein's general theory of relativity with electromagnetism. In fact, Allende claimed to have been taught by Einstein himself, and also claimed he could prove the unified field theory based on events he said he witnessed on October 28, 1943, and aliens. Allende claimed that he saw the Eldridge disappear from the Philadelphia Naval Yard, and he further insisted that the United States military had conducted what he called the Philadelphia experiment and was trying to cover it up. Jessup was then contacted by the Navy's Office of Naval Research, who had received a package containing Jessup's book with annotations claiming that extraterrestrial technology allowed the US government to make breakthroughs in unified field theory. This is one of the weirdest details. The annotations were designed to look like they were written by 3 different authors. One maybe extraterrestrial? Now, according to Valle's article for the Journal of Scientific Exploration, Jessup became obsessed with the lens revelations, and the disturbed researcher would take his own life in 1959. And it wasn't until 1980 that proof of a lens forgery would be made available. Inexplicably, two ONR officers had 127 copies of the annotated text printed and privately distributed by the military contractor Varro Manufacturing, giving wings to a lens story long after Jessup's death. So, what really happened aboard the USS Eldridge that day? According to Edward Dudgeon, who served in the US Navy aboard the USS Engstrom, both ships did have classified devices on board. Now, they were neither invisibility cloaks nor teleportation drives designed by aliens, but instead they scrambled the magnetic signatures of ships using the degaussing technique, which would provide protection from magnetic torpedoes aboard U-boats. How Stuff Works suggested that the green glow reported by witnesses that day could be explained by an electric storm or St. Elmo's fire, which, in addition to being an American coming-of-age film starring the Brat Pack, is a weather phenomenon in which plasma is created in a strong electric field, giving off a bright glow, almost like fire. Finally, inland canals used by the military connected Norfolk to Philadelphia, allowing the ship to travel between the two in a few hours, which would explain how the USS Eldridge could have been seen in both places that day. You know, it just went from one to the other and then came back. Maybe, I don't know. The USS Eldridge would be transferred to Greece in 1951 and sold for scrap in the 90s, but a lens hoax would live on in our f***ing nightmares forever. Good thing it's something that never happened. But, for all of you true believers out there, what are your favorite military conspiracy theories? I'm almost afraid to ask. No, I'm not. I'm not afraid of anything. Well, I am afraid of this theory. But anyway, it doesn't matter. Leave me a comment, let me know.
The Russian Sleep Experiment is the terrifying tale in which 5 people are kept awake for 15 days and the horrifying effect it had on their minds and bodies. Now, this is just a story, and there is no evidence to prove this actually happened, but with that in mind, people say with the things that were going on in this time period, there is a possibility something like this could have been conducted. Because we cannot forget that in the same era as this story is based, Russian scientists released a video of severed dog heads that were kept alive for several hours using an artificial blood circulation system. So, although this is fictional, there is a possibility it's based on historical experiments. So let's get into the story. In the 1940s, scientists in Russia decided to conduct experiments to test the effects of extreme sleep deprivation. They selected 5 World War II political prisoners deemed as enemies of the state and promised them freedom if they could stay awake for 30 days. They were then sealed into a small chamber and exposed to an experimental gas stimulant to keep them awake. The prisoners were monitored through portholes and microphones, and they were provided with enough food to last for a month, along with some books, running water, a toilet and beds. For the first 5 days, very little happened, apart from the discussions between the prisoners were getting more emotional and they started to reveal their inner thoughts to each other. On day